What's good, everybody? It's your best friend Patrick Fair from Fistful of Cards, and today we are going to be starting our brand new value breakdown series. In this series, I'm going to be looking at all the values in the game. That's 13 values, king through ace in that order, and we're going to be talking about what is good about the values, what about the values is maybe not so good, and whether or not you should run them as a core value, a supporting value, or whether you should just take what you want and run it as an off value. Today we're going to start with value 13, which is kings. It is the highest value in the game. We are going to start off with our deeds. Our deeds are pretty solid. We have a lot of what I'm going to call 2-1-1s. I've called them that in other videos. That just means that they cost 2, have 1 production, and 1 control point. And we have technically access to 6 of them because Open Wound is non-unique, which means you can run a place out of that. So that kind of allows us to cheat and just have really, really efficient deed economy, which is fantastic. We also have access to a very powerful out-of-town deed, even if it's less powerful in more structured decks. And we also have access to some interesting, I guess I'll call them combo deeds. Deeds you won't run as often because these other deeds are just so powerful, but there are decks that can take advantage of deeds like the Estate and Telegraph Office. So overall, we have nothing to complain about deeds. I will say the one sort of downside of the deeds is that the power level of the abilities on these deeds, despite their like economy and control point and production versus cost ratio, is really, really good. These abilities are okay. Sometimes your opponent can get a lot of mileage out of them if you're not protecting them in certain situations, but in general, they're okay. They're not that big of a deal. They're not gonna like make or break the game in a lot of situations, and they're not going to support very many archetypes unless you're doing something really cheeky. So overall, really solid from an economic standpoint, a little low in the power level and just in terms of what they do, but deeds can be evaluated just purely on their economy, and we will be doing that. Moving down into clubs. Clubs are bizarre. We have access to, much like our deeds, we have access to some very, very powerful options and then a bunch of weird situational stuff. We have things like Point Blank, love it, learn it, it's wonderful. We have things like Election Day Slaughter, which is okay. I mean, it's a fine job and kills people, and sometimes a deck in the higher values can't run something like Kidnapping. You can probably get away with Curse of Failure in most decks these days, but sometimes you're looking for Election Day Slaughter, and that's fine. Nightmare at Noon is okay. There isn't a whole lot of bullet manipulation in these higher values, and so a little bit, even if it's not the most powerful version of a bullet reduction card, it is still something. And then right after that, we go hard nosedive into these sort of super narrow, bizarre, janky cards, and that doesn't make them necessarily bad. Some of them, I will say, are underplayed and probably underpowered. Things like the Winning Agenda and Deliberate Infection don't see a whole lot of play because they're not very good in a lot of situations. Secret Tunnel, same thing. You can get some cheeky mileage out of Foreboding Glance. I definitely encourage you to experiment with that card. But we do have some powerful options followed by some interesting, more situational, maybe combo pieces that we can look at. And so overall, our clubs are actually pretty solid. So our diamonds are good. Our clubs are good. What about our hearts? Hearts are, they're interesting. Again, we continue this trend of a couple of really solid sort of general options followed by a bunch of messy cards. We've got Fancy New Hat and Stone's Colt Dragoons. Now, before this card was printed, which was in the newest set, this card was kind of our only general option, and that made Kings kind of awkward because Fancy New Hat isn't necessarily a bad card. However, a lot of decks were looking for something to give their shooting power a little bit of oomph, especially with cards like Point Blank being on the same value, and Fancy New Hat doesn't do that. It's a defensive sort of influence card, and that doesn't make it bad. It's just not what every deck is exactly looking for in terms of supporting their overall goal. And so it's nice that now we have the option of Fancy New Hat or Stone's Colt Dragoons, which are both in this same realm of sort of cheap, just dependable generic goods, which are very powerful. Outside of that, There's a lot of messy cards in here. We've got things that you'll probably never see, like Evanor and Auto Cattle Feeder, cards that just aren't worth it a lot of the times. Cavalry Escort is a horse, so you might see somebody run that in our horse variants, maybe a high value horse deck. Essence of Armitage is only good in one deck and kind of is only a one of in that deck, and so we are getting some better spells in the later in the game's life. We're getting some interesting power spikes in our king spells, but overall our hearts are really reliant on these two cards for the most part, with some people running some of these other hearts in sort of jankier or more narrow decks. And so overall, up to this point, we're like 75%, positive. We're at a solid B plus. Our hearts are a little bit weak, but then unfortunately we hit the spades, and spades is really what keeps king weak in terms of its ability to be played as a core value. Now, one of the biggest problems with spades is that all of the faction leaders, like the bosses of all the different factions, are all kings for the most part. And because of that, we end up in this problem where thematically they're all kind of the same kind of card. They're all super expensive, high upkeep, high cost, high stats, big game impacting abilities a lot of the times. However, they don't really have any synergy with each other. There's no off value dudes. I can't just pluck, Mario Crane and throw him in my entrepreneur's deck. It just doesn't really work like that for the most part. And because of that, you end up in the scenario where the neutral dudes are very underwhelming in a lot of instances, with them being sort of narrow in their own right. Also, none of them have influence, and so you can't even sort of do the thing that you normally do if your deck doesn't have a very strong suite of spades in your own faction. You can do things in almost every other value where you're like, okay, I'm going to grab the neutral dudes, I'm going to grab some of the off value dudes, and I'm going to combine them with the strongest dudes in my own faction, and I'm going to create my value structure. However, you can't really do that in this, and they're almost intentionally designed to be run as one-ofs. Abram Groff is designed for you to put one of him in your deck, and that's not bad. That doesn't make that design philosophy bad, but it does mean that if we're running it as a core value and we have to come up with 4 of these dudes to put into a deck, we end up in some problematic situations in a lot of factions. Now, some factions and some very, very narrow decks can take advantage of certain dudes, like Ivor Hawley in Abomination decks. Combined with Ticks, you can run a couple of him Ticks and just bite the bullet on somebody who's a little bit weaker, and that functions, that actually works in that specific deck. But outside of Abominations, outside of Ivor Hawley XP specifically, we start to see a big nosedive in the quality, especially when you get into factions like the Outlaws, where all of them are functionally the same person in terms of uniqueness. And so you can't even if you run them all in your deck, you can't even put more than one in your play, and that starts to create some big barriers for running this as a core value, in my opinion. And so where does that leave us overall? Kings have 3 really solid suits. Our diamonds are really good, our hearts are really good, and our clubs are really good. However, the spades are really narrow and really problematic in a lot of situations. And so I would not recommend running this as a core value. That means 16 of it. If I have to have 4 copies of every suit and, flush out my structure that way, I would recommend against that. However, as you've seen, there's tons of off-value cards. If I just wanted to grab some fancy new hats, some Stone Cold Dragoons, if I wanted to grab some of these spells, if I just wanted to grab some Point Blank, you'll see a lot of that on this channel. And even the deeds, you can grab some, just if I want some cheap economy deeds, I can grab that as well. And so it's a very solid supporting value for the same reason. If I only have to run 10 of these, then I can actually get a lot of mileage out of it, because I can run 3 of these and 3 of these and maybe 1 or 2 spades, and all of a sudden I've got a supporting structure to balance out my other core values, and that can create a stronger structure. But it doesn't mean I have to dedicate as much of my deck to kings, which I would recommend against. So that about wraps it up for King. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. We've got 12 more to go. If you loved it, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Either way, we want to see you in the comments, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.